Hi friend, welcome. In this lecture, you will learn two important concepts, data and database. Because if you are new in SQL, you need to know what you are dealing with first. If you know them already, you can skip this video. So let's start with what is the data? Data means the information that we store in somewhere to use it later. If you type something on a notebook, it is data. Or if you store something in a text file, or into an Excel spreadsheet, or into some other places like the databases, they are all called as data. Whatever information you store in somewhere is called as data. And data is the most important thing in this era. We gradually create data by all our actions. For example, you are using your phones and using lots of applications. All your actions produce some data in some databases. Nowadays, the data can be considered as anything that can be stored digitally. I mean, some text like dates, names, addresses, salaries, the info that created by some apps or machines, etc. Of course, the images, PDF or similar files, etc. are also called as data. So if you think about all these, we have a huge amount of data to store and manage. And it is growing so fast. So where we store the data? At first, we stored data in the papers. Then, because of the security or some other reasons, we carried them into the electronic environments. We started storing them into some text files or folders, etc. Then, since these environments did not meet the data increase, we had to use something better. So these data must be stored in somewhere that can be stored more structural and organized and must answer to our questions to retrieve the data. So we started using some tools like Excel spreadsheets. With using these tools, we could easily store bigger data and retrieve them easily. Besides, we could use some functions, macros, etc. so that we could do many complicated things. However, along the time that the data increased surprisingly fast, we understood that Excels are not the place to store the big data. At that time, the databases come for our help and we stored almost all the data in the databases. So what are the databases then? A database is basically a place that we store an organized collection of data. Means it's an electronic system that allows us to store the data, then easily access to it, manipulate it, or retrieve it efficiently. In a real usage, a database consists of the storage, memory, processor, and software. So with this software, we can easily store and organize our data into that storage devices. They might be different in different databases, but you can think of them as the hard drives in your computer. Most basically, a database is a software that you can install into your computer or some other places that organizes our data systematically. Then you can easily query and manipulate that data efficiently, no matter how big it is. In these days, almost all the data in companies are stored in the databases. There are some employees who maintain the database, lots of employees who organize the database, and so many employees who use the database. While the database architects were creating the databases, they had some different methodologies about how to access and manipulate the data. So they created different types of database management systems. And of course, different databases using these systems. So what are the database management systems then? Database management systems are the collections of programs that enable the users to access the database, manipulate the data, and retrieve the data to the users. Most of the times, you will hear that as DBMS, which is the abbreviation of Database Management Systems. Alright, there are a few types of database management systems. In this lecture, we will see the four major types of them. The first one is hierarchical DBMS. This type of DBMS uses a parent-child relationship for storing the data. It stores the data like a tree with nodes and branches. The registry usage of Windows XP is a good example for this DBMS type. But this type of DBMS is used so rarely nowadays, so no need to go further for this type. The second one is network DBMS. RDM server is an example of this type. This type uses many-to-many relations, but this type generally results complex database structures, so it's not a frequently used database management systems model. The third one is relational database management systems. This type is the most used database management systems nowadays. The Oracle database, MySQL, MS SQL, and many others use this type of database management systems. Unlike the network DBMS, relational DBMS does not support many-to-many relationship. Relational DBMS have some entities, basically means tables, and we establish some relations between these entities. This type of DBMS have predefined types and you can store only these types in it. You will see this type more detailed in the next lectures. The last one is object relational database management systems. This type supports storing new data types because you can have your own objects and each object is a type in it. So you can have your own type in it. The objects here have attributes, means the data, and the methods that define what to do with this data. If you are familiar with an object-oriented language, you will understand that better. This is also a useful database management system, and maybe the most known example of that type is PostgreSQL. Great. These are the 4 most known database management systems. But the most used one is a relational database management system, which is also called as RDBMS. And Oracle uses RDBMS in their databases. So in the next lectures, you will learn this type more detailed. Alright, in this lecture, we have mentioned 2 key concepts, which are the data and the database, especially for the students who have no prior experience about that. And we have mentioned about the database management systems briefly. So this is the end of this lecture. See you in the next lectures.